Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Senate has confirmed Jeff Sessions as Attorney General after a 52-47 vote Wednesday evening. Sessions' confirmation has faced widespread protest over his opposition to the Voting Rights Act and his history of making racist comments. The vote capped a contentious 24 hours. On Tuesday night, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren was silenced and rebuked by the Senate for reading a 1986 letter written by Coretta Scott King denouncing Sessions, who was at the time being considered for a federal judgeship. The letter reads in part, quote, "The irony of Mr. Sessions' nomination is that if confirmed, he'll be given a life tenure for doing with a federal prosecution what the local sheriffs accomplished 20 years ago with clubs and cattle prods," unquote. Following Senator Warren's silencing, a number of Democratic senators urged their colleagues to vote against Sessions by reading the same letter. Senator Warren's reading marks the first time Coretta Scott King's testimony was included in the congressional record, even though King had submitted it 30 years ago. At the time, the Senate Judiciary Chair, Strom Thurmond, a fierce segregationist, did not enter King's testimony into the record. We'll have more on Sessions' confirmation, as well as the rebuke of Senator Warren after headlines. President Trump lashed out at the appeals court judges who are presiding over the lawsuit challenging his executive order banning people from 7 majority Muslim nations from entering the United States.
If you were a good student in high school or a bad student in high school, you can understand this. And it's really incredible to me that we have a court case that's going on so long, and it couldn't have been written any more precisely. It's not like, oh, gee, we wish it were written better. It was written beautifully.
That's President Trump speaking in Washington, D.C. Wednesday to a conference of law enforcement officials. During his comments, he also called the deliberations disgraceful. Trump's attack comes after he went on a Twitter rant over the weekend against federal Judge James Robart, calling him a so-called judge after Robart issued a nationwide injunction halting Trump's Muslim ban. Trump's rant sparked widespread criticism, including from Trump's Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch, who called Trump's tweets disheartening and demoralizing during a meeting with Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal. This morning, Trump attacked Senator Blumenthal on Twitter, claiming he was misrepresenting Gorsuch's words, even though a spokesperson for Judge Gorsuch himself told CNN the judge had voiced concern about Trump's comments during the meeting. The mother of a young British woman killed by a mentally ill man in Australia in August has written a furious open letter to President Trump after her daughter's killing was included in the White House's list of 78 terrorist attacks. Rosie Iliff wrote, quote, "My daughter's death will not be used to further this insane persecution of innocent people," unquote. Her daughter, 21-year-old Mia Iliff Chung, was stabbed to death in a hostel in Queensland by a Frenchman who had a preliminary diagnosis of schizophrenia. After the attack, the media originally reported the attacker, Smail Ayad, may have been an Islamic extremist, but Australian police quickly ruled out terrorism in its investigation. Sandra Jackson, the mother of a second backpacker who was killed during the attack, has also criticized Donald Trump, tweeting, quote, @RealDonaldTrump, wake up this morning to see you've used my son murder to further your campaign of hate. How dare you? You are a disgrace," unquote. President Trump is facing increasing criticism for not including cases of massacres carried out by white supremacists in the White House's recently issued list of 78 terrorist attacks. Among the attacks not included was the recent massacre in Quebec City, Canada, where Trump-supporting white nationalists killed 6 worshippers at a mosque on January 29th. Also not included was the Charleston, South Carolina massacre, where 9 black worshippers were killed by white supremacist Dylan Roof in 2015. On Tuesday, Wisconsin Republican Congressman Sean Duffy tried to defend the exclusion of these massacres from the list during an interview with CNN's Allison Camerata.
Congressman, why isn't the president talking about the white terrorist who mowed down 6 Muslims who were praying at their mosque?
Yeah, I don't know. But I would just tell you there is a difference. Again, death and murder on both sides is wrong. But if you want to take the dozens of scenarios where ISIS-inspired attacks have taken innocents, And you give me one example of what's happening. I think that was in Canada.
How about the
Charleston?
America? How about the Charleston church shooting?
But here's what
he was
you're
an
doing.
extremist. He was a white extremist.
He was. Okay.
How about that? That doesn't matter?
No, it does matter. It does matter. Look at the good things that came from it. Nikki Haley took down the Confederate flag. That was great.
Congressman Duffy did not acknowledge during this interview that in his home state of Wisconsin, a white supremacist killed 6 people in 2012 during a massacre at a Sikh temple. Meanwhile, the White House is also considering officially designating more groups as foreign terrorist organizations, including the Muslim Brotherhood, one of the Middle East's oldest and most influential Islamic groups. Protesters rallied at demonstrations nationwide Wednesday to protest the Army Corps of Engineers' announcement it'll be green-lighting the construction of the contested $3.8 billion Dakota Access pipeline. The company behind the pipeline, Energy Transfer Partners, says it'll start work immediately upon being granted the final permit. Hundreds of people gathered outside the White House in Washington, D.C. to protest the project, which many fear could contaminate the Missouri River, which serves as a drinking source for over 10 million people. Crowds also gathered in Los Angeles, Manhattan, Denver, and San Francisco, where about a dozen people were arrested blockading the doors of the federal building. More protesters rallied in Ithaca, New York, Columbus, Ohio, and in Chicago, where 4 people were arrested after locking themselves to each other to shut down a city bank to protest its investments in the Dakota Access pipeline. Many of the protesters were furious not only about the government's approval of the pipeline, but also about Trump's recent claims that no one had called the White House to express opposition to the project.
As you know, I approved 2 pipelines that were stuck in limbo forever. I don't even think it was controversial. You know, I approved them. I haven't had one call from anybody saying, oh, that was a terrible thing you did. I haven't had one call.
As multiple news outlets have reported, the White House shut down its public comments phone line following Trump's inauguration. However, hundreds of thousands of people have written statements denouncing the project since the Army Corps of Engineers opened up the public comment period in late January. On Wednesday, a group of veterans and indigenous water protectors delivered electronic versions of more than 200,000 of these comments to the Army Corps office in Manhattan. Meanwhile, the City Council of Davis, California, has voted to unanimously divest $124 million in city banking services from Wells Fargo over concerns about the bank's backing of the pipeline. In Phoenix, Arizona, at least 6 protesters were arrested last night blockading an Immigrations and Customs Enforcement van in efforts to stop the deportation of 35-year-old Guadalupe Garcia de Reyes, a woman and mother who has been living in the United States for the last 21 years. Reyes was arrested and detained Wednesday by immigration agents during one of her routine required check-ins with immigration officials. Advocates say her arrest signals a clear shift toward the ramping up of deportations under the Trump administration, even of people like Reyes, who've been deemed a low priority for deportation under President Obama. Reyes' lawyer said, quote, "We're living in a new era now, an era of war on immigrants," unquote. In protest, hundreds of people surrounded the ICE van carrying Reyes. One man locked himself to the wheels of the van while others blockaded it with their bodies.
So we're here stopping the kidnapping of Lupita so that she can be with her family. I'm here because today it's Lupita, tomorrow it may be my mom, and the next day it might be your mom. We need to stop the deportations because there are 8 million people at risk. There are 8 million people who are priority in the Trump administration, in the Trump deportation machine. And he's not going to stop it. We have to stop it in your city, here in Phoenix, wherever you are. You can do this too.
President Trump is facing allegations of potential conflicts of interest after he attacked the department store Nordstrom in a tweet from his official government account, saying, quote, "My daughter Ivanka has been treated so unfairly by Nordstrom. She's a great person, always pushing me to do the right thing. Terrible, exclamation point," unquote. The tweet came after Nordstrom announced it's dropping Ivanka's clothing line, a business decision the company says was based on performance. White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer claims Nordstrom's decision was an attack on Trump's daughter. But multiple reporters have questioned how this is an attack on Ivanka, given she claims she'd stepped away from her clothing line after Trump's election. Pennsylvania Senator Bob Casey has referred the tweet to the U.S. government, the U.S. Office of Government Ethics. Ivanka has no official government role, but she frequently sits in on top meetings with her father and her husband, Jared Kushner, a senior advisor in the White House. Meanwhile, in another potential conflict of interest, the Pentagon is looking to rent office space in Trump Tower in Manhattan, which means the government might end up funneling money directly to one of Trump's businesses. CNN reports that renting a floor in the tower costs about $1.5 million every year. In northern Afghanistan, 6 Red Cross workers were killed Wednesday after their cars were ambushed. 2 more are still missing. Taliban has denied involvement, and local officials have blamed the attack on ISIS. On Wednesday, ISIS claimed responsibility for a suicide bomb attack outside the Supreme Court building in Kabul Tuesday, which killed at least 22 people. In Romania, thousands of people braved the snow for a 9th straight day of anti-government and anti-corruption protests. The massive nightly mobilizations have been the largest in Romania since 1989. They were sparked by the passage of an emergency ordinance that decriminalized misconduct by officials, but have continued even after the government rescinded that decree. This is one of the protesters.
Keeping our position strong, and we want our government to resign because we cannot trust this government, because we caught him in the middle of the night passing laws for corrupt politicians. We cannot trust this government anymore. So the only thing that can satisfy us right now is the resignation of the Prime Minister and the government itself.
At least 3 players on the New England Patriots say they won't visit the White House for the traditional Super Bowl celebration as a protest against President Trump. Linebacker Donta Hightower and safety Devin McCourty have joined tight end Martellus Bennett in boycotting the presidential visit. McCourty said, quote, "I don't feel accepted in the White House. With the president having so many strong opinions and prejudices, I believe certain people might feel accepted there while others won't," unquote. The Patriots won the Super Bowl 34-28 Sunday night after a historic comeback over the Atlanta Falcons. And a Pennsylvania state senator has issued an unusually strong denouncement of President Trump, calling him a, quote, fascist, loofah-faced blank Gibbon, unquote. Senator Dalen Leach's tweet was a response to Trump's threat that he would destroy the career of a Texas state senator who is proposing legislation to require police to obtain a conviction before seizing one's property in a process known as asset forfeiture. Currently, asset forfeiture allows police to seize people's property even if they're never even charged with a crime. After Trump's threat, Dalen tweeted, quote, "Hey, real Donald Trump, I oppose civil asset forfeiture too. Why don't you try to destroy my career, you fascist, loofah-faced, bloop, Gibbon," unquote. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.